Welcome to the Dog Ate My Strategy Show. In the next 30 minutes, we will help you switch off, bring you entertainment, and chat to some specifically chosen guests who will help you realise that you are more capable than you will ever know. In each episode, we offer practical ideas for reshaping your career, enhancing your skills, and building higher self-belief, whether you're stuck, coasting, or craving a new direction. This show helps you silence negativity and challenge your current mindset with a blend of inspiration, positivity, and fun moments. So get ready for real stories, real mindset shifts, and real change. Well, welcome to episode 6 of the Dog Ate My Strategy Show, and we have a special treat today. So just a reminder, previously on the Dog Ate My Strategy Show, we had Natalie the vet, who talked about dealing with pressure, the importance of teamwork, and remaining calm in a highly emotional situation. And then we moved on to Karen Dunbar. If you remember, Karen's the comedian, actress, and DJ, and she talks about finding peace in what you do and not being scared of taking up opportunities, even if you don't feel fully prepared. A great couple of episodes about reinventing yourselves. And then on the last episode, we had the brilliant Lena Datani, who took us through her story about how she became more confident and found her voice. And that enabled her to bring her skills to many different people through doing talks. So the big question that people always ask me is the grass always greener on the other side? So today we'll hear from Mark and Ashleigh about their experience in leaving some very secure roles and setting up their own business. But first, let's introduce today's panel. So David Johnson, say hello.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here.
And Emma B, say hello.
Hello, everyone.
So it's been quite a while, a few weeks since we all spoke. So Emma, what's been going on in your life lately?
So I've been on the travels again. This time I've been to Edinburgh, which I have been to before, and it was absolutely fantastic and beautiful part of the world to visit.
Well, what goes on in Edinburgh then? Do the lots of eating, drinking? Did you go up to see the castle?
Lots of walking, lots of exploring. But what was interesting at the weekend was that there was a concert on. So the whole city was surrounded in cowboys and cowgirls for the afternoon and evening, which was very entertaining.
So who was the group or person who was on if everybody's getting dressed up in the old cowboy and cowgirl outfit, Emma?
Oh, I can't remember their name, but they're a country and western singer from America. So quite a big name, and certainly there was a lot of people that were going to see them at the weekend and practically drunk before they even got there. So hopefully they enjoyed the experience.
The usual accompaniment of lots of alcohol at concerts. I thought you were going to say, actually, Gary, we're an R&B act, so we're trying to work out why is everybody dressed up as cowboys and cowgirls? Is there something strange going on in Edinburgh? So what about kilts? Do you possess a kilt then, Emma?
Definitely not. There was only a few people that were dressed up in kilts, which was a bit of a shame. But it was rather wet, windy, and I don't think anybody wanted to risk wearing a kilt that day.
What about shortbreads? Did you come back with plenty of shortbreads in those nice tartan tins?
No shortbread, but they did have their sugary tablet, which is kind of like fudge. So that was very enjoyable, and I don't think I have any teeth left to eat with now.
Okay, so Emma's looking for an NH dentist in Bath, is it where you live?
Definitely, I need them fixing.
Right, okay. So, Mr. Johnson, what have you been up to?
Well, Gary, I mean, this is heavyweight stuff. I've got a project going on that I'm involved with, and I have to find myself the right JCT build contract, and it's proving a nightmare. Finally got to the right website, and it was like arriving in a sweet shop. There were so many different contracts. My goodness. You know that feeling when you're a young lad and you've got a small amount of pocket money and you walk into the sweet shop, you've got all these different ones in here. I don't know which one I want. I know I need a sweet. I know I'm going to buy a sweet. It's been quite a challenge. And here we are. I think we got the web. Right, fine. Too many people saying, oh, this is the one you need, or that's the one you need. Okay, let's turn to the AI Copilot and Chat GPT. Even they conflict. And then on the website, can you get hold of somebody to say, right, this is what I need, this is what I'm looking for, which one do I need? Well, My goodness, quite a challenge.
So is this a palace that you're building then, David, or is this an extension?
Well,
Because
that's
it
the
sounds
trouble.
like a big building that you're planning to put down there in Glastonbury.
Well, this is where I'm probably overthinking it, because it's not a palace, but there needs to be something in place in order. It's the old story. One hopes you never look at it. You get it signed, you put it in the bottom drawer and never take it out. What I did eventually, because I couldn't actually speak to anyone on any of the websites or the provider of the fundamental contract, no matter how I tried, even the inquiry people didn't come back to me, and the bot wasn't very helpful. I actually found somebody in my own network, within not too far from where I live. Great. They came up with, right, this is the one that you need, and they were able to take it through. And in effect, I found my own mentor to help me through this. I reckon I can now make sure that my team's happy, the building contractors are happy, and we'll be able to proceed without too many hiccups.
And if it all crashes down, David, at least you have a legal document to hold them to account.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm hoping for. But it's the old story. Ask the right questions, find the right people to speak to, and that way it takes out a load of stress, takes out a load of worry. So helpful.
In the day of the internet, we've got so much information, probably too much, and it's like I had 15 million bits of information, and I went to the local shop, and somebody in the queue would just say, "Yeah, I went through that. This is what you do," and within 10 minutes, it's like solved. So I think it just proves that there's not just one way of finding information that you need to actually make a decision. Excellent. So I was thinking about today, and we've got two absolutely fantastic guests on who are classed as entrepreneurs. And I'm thinking back to when I was 8 years old. I thought when I was younger, I was very inventive. And when I got to 8 years old, I switched the inventive switch off for a long, long time. So why was that? Well, I was 8 years old, and I didn't go to school. I was full of cold. And I'm going back in time. So you probably remember this, Emma. On TV, there used to be those Ready Brek adverts, where they used to make Ready Brek with milk. I don't know why, but my mum would never make it with milk. She always made it with water. And so I thought, maybe it might just be a little bit better that morning, having it with milk. And I thought, I'm going to go in the fridge, get the milk out, and then I'm going to put it in the kettle, because that's the only device I was allowed to use. Couldn't use the cooker. So, of course, I put the milk in the kettle. Why does it keep switching off? And obviously, I haven't done physics at that stage of my life. So what I did is I went and I found some electrician tape. And what I did is I put it on the switch. I went into the living room, put the kettle on, put the tape down. Literally 5 minutes, and there was a loud explosion. A piece of kettle, which I can only now describe as shrapnel, came through the thin council wall, which was the partition from the kitchen to the living room, missed me, hit the window, cracked it. And I just wondered what on earth has gone on. So I opened the kitchen door. Oh, man. There was a film in the 1970s called Earthquake, and it was like a scene from that. The kitchen window was smashed. There were still electric sparks on the worktop where the kettle had been. There were bits of metal all in the kitchen wall. And then I noticed half the kettle lid had sort of buried itself in the fridge door. And there were boiling hot milk all over the floor. So I just casually went into the next room. I think I put the TV on and watched Scooby-Doo for half an hour, tried to get some inspiration and think of what next to do. And my dad worked shifts, so this was probably around 10 o'clock, so I waited till 2 o'clock. He came in, and he just looked, and I had to explain everything. And I remember he said to me these words. He says, "Look, Gary," he says, "you're either going to be a genius, or," he says, "you're going to live a troubled life." Obviously, I followed the latter. Let's not hang around, and let's bring on Ashleigh and Mark. So welcome to our special guest spot on the Dog Ate My Strategy show. We have two guests today. So imagine this. Imagine you've worked incredibly hard to reach a senior position in one of the biggest companies in the world. You're performing well, but over time you become a little frustrated. But You're held in place by rewards, the status, and what you feel you've invested to actually get there. So when you start to ask yourself, what do you really want? Do you actually have the courage to remove the safety net and make a significant change? One that's going to bring financial risk, intense pressure, but could finally give you what you've always wanted from a role. So let's hear from today's guests, who are Ashleigh Wells and Mark Goddard, about removing that safety net and making that big move. So welcome, Ashleigh, and welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
And I also have David Johnson from the team with me as well today. From a listener's point of view, let's go back in time. I think this is quite a way back. So we're going to go back to when you were working for a big corporation. And I just want to position everybody with where you were at in that organisation and how hard you'd worked to actually get to what I call a very senior level. So let's talk to Ash first about that.
I was working in operating theatres from the age of 18 to around 25. So I was still very young, never done any sales, but I would sort of probably say I was very efficient at orthopedics in particular and working in theatres. And so I was almost poached by one of the leaders of Depew UK at the time and asked if I'd want to come for an interview, which was a bit of a shock for me. But I decided to go. And I ended up working in Depew as a sales rep in trauma, which was a tiny little division for Depew J&J at the time. That's where I met Mark. Being tiny meant that you stood out. You weren't the normal part of the crew, and so you could really make a difference and you could really be seen. And I was lucky enough that happened to me, and so I was moved very, very rapidly up the senior chain and became a regional manager, then the national sales manager for trauma and extremities, then become the sort of sales manager or director of the hip and knee division, which at the time, I think in the UK, Depew UK at that time was double the size of any other. Well, second in line was Stryker at the time. We were double in size in terms of monetary value and implants implanted. So, it was a big job, and I'd done that career leap in around 7 years, which was unheard of. So I felt at the time, I felt really lucky to keep being promoted. And that's part of why I ended up working so hard to get there.
Okay. So, Mark, you had a senior role. So just a bit of background on you just before we launch into the big change in your career.
So I joined Depew a little bit after Ash and as an account manager as well, and moved on through the trauma and extremities team as a manager and into the hip and knee team. And I was being sort of groomed for a job running another franchise of J&J. When we decided to, or we discussed the opportunity of maybe going out on our own.
And so for people listening, when we're talking about Depew were part of the Johnson & Johnson medical company, which is probably one of the biggest medical companies in the world, and certainly had a huge operation in EMEA and especially in the UK. So let's go back to you, Ash. So you've worked your way up, you're going to board meetings, you've got a high level of influence. So what changed? I mean, what was that sort of first sort of thought process around, I need to do something else, I may be a bit frustrated, maybe I just don't feel right in this position. What happened? What was that trigger point?
I think it's a very personal decision you make, and I'm certainly not on this podcast to downplay how great it can be in the corporate life, because for lots of part of my corporate life, I really enjoyed. And I give Johnson & Johnson 10 out of 10 for all the education they gave me. And I wouldn't be the person I am today. Some of the things that Mark and me discuss on a daily basis all come from the background of working for J&J. But personally, as I stated earlier, I worked in theatres, and comradeship and being close to patients and surgeons was important to me. I'd forgotten that, and I sat in boardrooms with you, Gary, on many occasions, and at one point I felt a complete loss of power and loss of influence. I'd moved up to that stage and had 9 regional managers who all had 6 to 8 people reporting to them. I had a training manager, etc. And when I need to make a decision or make a difference to how I wanted us to approach the market, I just felt like my message got lost and got diluted. I got to the stage where it was very difficult to influence what my team were doing on the ground. And I'm sure many, many managers in senior positions feel that same thing. And for me, I had an importance on how we look after patients and our customers. That was really important to me. And so the personal approach that I had to take was I realized that I'm now sitting in a boardroom. I did go out and see customers, but I didn't have a lot of time to do as much as it as I liked. And so I realized that I needed to change something that would get me back to where I could make a difference.
Okay. And so for people who are not involved in the medical industry, when Ash talks about theatres, we're not talking about him starring in Mousetrap or anything like that on the West End. We're actually talking about operating theatres, which for anybody who works for any medical company is an absolute key place where, you go, you observe operations, you talk to theatre staff, you also talk to clinicians. Okay, so let's ask Mark as well, Mark. So what triggered in your mind, Mark, what were the push towards, I want to do something different?
I think a little bit like Ash, there's a certain disillusionment with corporate life. But the other thing just to add in was we were now working in the hip and knee team. We'd previously been working in trauma and extremities, and we built up a really good relationship with that customer group. We kept coming across customers that weren't very happy. They were saying, why can't you come back and look after us again? And we said, well, we've got different jobs. We just can't do it anymore. And it dawned on us that there was an opportunity to go back and give these surgeons and their theatre teams the type of service that they were used to in the past. And so that was where the opportunity sort of dawned on us that there might be a chance of doing something slightly different that we're doing now.
As you start to climb the ladder, you start to have to learn different skills, and you start to see your role change into more of a management role, more of in your case, a corporate role. And it is right, you can carry on doing that and just say, let's just go and do this in a different company. And after a while, it's doing the same thing. It's just a different view with different people. In your case, you made this big dramatic leap. So when did that start to happen, and how did you find that process of making some of those big decisions?
I have to admit, it took a long time. And, I had some really good relationships at Depew. I was there for 12 years or something in total. And I really valued Depew. I had loads of friends. I have to admit, on the last day of my work, when I'd handed my notice in, I was the last one in my office at 6:30 on a Friday PM. And I had to shed a tear as I walked out the office. Still makes me quite emotional now as I walked out. It really meant a lot to me working there. So it was a major, major decision. I had 2 young children. I bought a house in Leeds. So I had all these sort of responsibilities that I had to uphold. But J&J gave me something, and my relationship with Mark gave me something, and that was true confidence in my abilities. That I could make this work. Going back to what I said before, I really did believe I could make a difference to surgeons and patients, and that I had the ability to do that. That's where I came from. I come from theatres, and I'm good at it, and I knew I was good at it. My biggest doubt was, were the surgeons really buying from Ash, or were they buying because of the company name of Depew J&J, which was the biggest orthopaedic company in the UK? That I had a doubt. But I didn't have a doubt about Ash. And so that was my overall driving force to make me make the move and not turn my back, but walk away from my friends to some extent. I can't underestimate how difficult that was. It was a really, really difficult decision for me.
So, Mark, where did you start then? You've got this sense of purpose about, I want to get back into really working, for surgeons. I want to give them the best experience, the best products we can. That's what gets you out of bed. So where did you start? You've got an idea, you know the sort of sector. What were the first sort of 2 or 3 things that you did to really get the ball rolling?
Well, one of the first things we did was we had to identify some manufacturers of some products so that we could have. Luckily, we were looking at small foot screws, quite simple orthopedic products. And we went around Europe and we visited France and Germany, the UK, and we got some product from each of those. We sent it off to be tested, and it turned out that the German-made product was the premium product. So we went back to Germany and we met a company called Moretti Medical, and we still work with those guys today. And they began to manufacture our screws, or we started to distribute their screws to begin with, to get us going, to get some money in the bank before we could go and get our own CE mark and get our own products under the WG name.
And that's a significant change in going and selling other products and commercializing to going out there and trying to find a product that is good, is competitive, there's a market for it. And then you have to start thinking about the sort of supply chain cost as well. So how did you cope with the financial side then, Ashleigh? Because, you've got probably enough good experience around identification of a good product and knowing how you can market that. But what about everything else that's new to you around this process around financing, supply chain, etc.?
Well, I'll admit to you, I relied on Mark. So most people that know us know that we are yin and yang. When we started the company, first decision we made was we clarified who would do what, who had responsibility for what. And there was no doubt in our minds that I had the responsibility to grow the sales, to get the business, to use my relationships that I already had. I'm not saying Mark didn't do that, but that weight fell on my shoulders. And likewise, the yang, I'm the yin, the yang was Mark, and Mark had to look at all those other areas. So Mark had to do the biggest change. Like, I have to admit to you, Gary, I never had access to the WG bank account for the whole time that we had the bank account. For the 5 years that we had the business, I didn't have access. I never looked at it, and I had 100% trust in Mark, and I never needed to. I would always, the yin and yang characters, I push all boundaries. I'm a nightmare to work with. Most people wouldn't even go anywhere near me, but Mark, for some mad reason, decided to go for it. And so what I do is I push every boundary that I possibly can, and I rely on Mark to bring me back to where he'll just go with it. And when he goes with it, I know that I've got the right sort of level of danger. Otherwise, I'd have gone bankrupt in the first 6 months. But I needed that yang. I needed that other person to do the balance. But Mark needed me to push us to the limit where we were going to be successful. And I believe that's part of it.
Yeah, can I add in there, Gary? It was a bit like, I suppose, if you want to take it into a corporate world, a CEO and a COO type of role.
Right.
Ash will make quick decisions. Luckily, my style is a reflective style. And what that did was gave me and him a couple of days to to think about these things. And sometimes before I even said, well, I'm not quite sure, Ash, this might not be a great idea, he came back and said, no, that's not a good idea. I've had to think about it. We won't do that. So this sort of cooling off period and how we worked was, I don't know, very much like an accelerator and a brake. When we got to a corner, I dabbed the brakes a little bit and we get round it. So that's sort of how it worked. And yeah, there was quite a lot for me to learn. But what we did, and I think was a really key point when we first started out, was although I took a lot of that on, we still focus on sales, on going and seeing these customers and saying, look, we can give you better service. Come and work with this new entity, WG Healthcare, but you don't know that, but you know us. And so we outsourced our logistics to somebody else. We outsourced our accountancy to a bookkeeper who chased our debts and certain things like that, so that kept the cash coming in. And we had that sort of almost, tunnel vision on making sure that the sales were driving some money to come through with the cash flow.
But I think it's quite interesting that, two different characters, two similar skill sets, but Ash, you're driven, you're just like, right, let's just think of this and how we do it, somebody else sort out. But sometimes you need that. And then Mark, obviously, playing that calm sort of role of handbrake man. And that is really the opposite to corporations, where a lot of time they're trying to get similar people. We need similar people. And although diversity is something they want to do, the diversity of real people in the thinking and the way they behave is something that probably doesn't get much focus.
Yeah, and I think the carrying the weight of the sales for me was my driving force to be successful. It's almost like it made it happen, because I didn't want to let Mark down. I didn't want to let my family down. We needed these sales. And so, for the listeners, don't think setting up a business, this sounds like a walk in the park, because it certainly wasn't. I was living with my parents-in-law for 2 or 3 nights a week. I lived in Leeds, and most of the business that we first won was in Surrey and Sussex, because I had good relationships there. We went to the best relationships we had. So my parents-in-law live near Gatwick Airport, and so I was staying with them. And, it was a really tough part of life, being away from my young children and family. The the force that I had behind me to get the sales number was more powerful, and so I had to make it happen. But it was not easy.
I think one key thing is what Mark says is you didn't try to master everything, saying, we're two business owners, we need to do everything. You were smart enough to say, this is the core, this is what's going to deliver the business. And everything else that works around that, we have to decide the best way of doing that so that we're not trying to do 100% of everything. We do 100% commercial and all, the key things, logistics, admin and finance. We just need to make sure that it's in good control, and we need to know probably what's going on to make decisions, and that's it.
And another secret, Gary, to our success is that we sold and focused on what we knew. And when I say we knew really well. We knew this product range and this surgery type and these surgeons really, really well. It's not like for example, it's not like we were running a coffee shop and then decided to go open our own burger business. We were selling foot and ankle, Mark and myself, for most of our lives, and then we moved into hip and knee. But most of our lives, we knew foot and ankle and trauma, and so we focused in that market. And that focus on what we knew was also a major factor in our success.
And I think I'll add to that is that for any listeners out there, and the thought process when you're going through, am I going to go and run my own business, is I need to have lots of products to get lots of sales. And actually being very niche is you end up spending all your time on something small, which really, really, and you become a real expert in it. My advice to anyone out there is go niche. Don't go everywhere. If you look at, there's lots of people doing everything. Go very niche and become expert in it. I'd say within 3 years, we were the number one foot and ankle company in the UK.
So how did you start to grow? Did you find any restrictions where you're thinking, we'd like to do this, but we're restricted because of cash or whatever, or because of resources? Or did you start to say, actually, we have a plan to grow, and you started to grow at a good rate, just sticking to what you knew, which was sales? I just wondered how that worked, and at what point did it really take off? And were there any times where you thought, we need to do something just to start to get that acceleration?
Yeah, I think we took a very, very basic view of money, which meant that the company hardly had any debt, well, ever. We started up with, I don't know, 40,000 UK pounds, which is not a lot of money to start up a medical company. And we had another 20,000 from a loan from a family member. And all of that was paid back within a year. So first of all, we wanted to pay that back. After that, there was no debt. So it was all organic growth. And the benefit of that was the focus kept on sales. If we wanted to grow and expand, as you said, Gary, we had to get more money in to be able to afford to do it. So we never ever borrowed money. We never had any debt. There were times when we thought we might have to go into invoice financing. Cash flow was sort of looking a bit dodgy, but we never ever did that. So we did grow, but we grew organically. And I suppose Ash can talk a bit more about his thoughts on how that sales growth sort of occurred.
Yeah, I think, we also didn't scatter ourselves around lots and lots of different hospital accounts. We went to our key accounts, which was actually one of the sort of golden nuggets of the business, is that where I had probably my best relationships with surgeons, and where I'd learned a lot myself on surgical techniques and how to do foot surgery, was with some of the surgeons in Haywards Heath. And so I spent a lot of time there and saying to them, I've got this product, and they were interested in it, and they decided to go with Mark and me because of our relationships, our history. They knew they could trust us. And then while in that hospital in Haywards Heath, I met a surgeon that probably changed Mark and my life forever. This surgeon was practicing something. He's French, and he'd come over to work in the UK 2 days a week, and he was just a genius. And he transformed foot surgery in our eyes, because in foot surgery you're generally doing quite big incisions for the area. It's quite destructive to the soft tissues. And this guy from France was doing it all through a tiny little stab incision of what we now call minimally invasive foot surgery. And we watched him for a period of time, and then we started learning from him. We realized this is going to be amazing. And so Mark and me grabbed it by the horns and worked with him and used him as a surgeon champion. And then another colleague of his joined, and that was the growth, that was the birth of minimally invasive foot surgery. And if you look now, if you did a search on that, it's become a worldwide thing, massive in the USA. And it all came from little Haywards Heath and Mark and Ash observing the surgeon. But going back to Mark's point is we stayed and worked in Haywards Heath, and it became our focus account. We massively, I believe, benefited them and the patients, which was my goal why I left. And they massively benefited WG Healthcare for Mark and me. It was a great working relationship that we developed.
Funny enough, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And being in these accounts regularly meant that we met this surgeon. So there are certain things, that you have when you're, set up a business. And we had sort of really good bits of luck at certain times. A lot of it was self-made, as in we were in the right place at the right time. But you need those elements as well as your skill, your knowledge, and your experience.
I think what's interesting, though, is the route you've taken, because I did some work for the government, actually, on the Help to Grow, looking at small businesses. And I think what happens is they want to get into everything. They don't segment and focus small. Or they're able to start there. And instead of saying, what do we do in this type of the marketplace? They want to get bigger and broader. And so they start to lose focus. And like you were saying, Mark, and then if they have something that's a bit niche, even if it's a service, it gets watered down a little bit. And then they just become like every other player. And unfortunately, they don't have the bank accounts to back them to actually make that next leap. So they sort of get stuck and get disillusioned. And I thought it were interesting just hearing you Mark, talk about, the focus, the sticking to the niche. And the fact that a bit of luck is involved as well, with the French surgeon coming up with the technique, but also having the foresight then to say, how do we expand this?
And you also need where Mark mentioned about skill and knowledge, you have to have the skill and the knowledge to notice that Joel was the cat's eye in the road for me, as in what he was doing at the time. But many people had seen Joel and worked for big orthopedic companies that had not said, this guy's doing some amazing stuff, and amazing surgical techniques. So, but my skill and knowledge meant that I stood back and thought, wow, this is incredible. We need to work on this. It is a combination of many factors. And yeah, I agree. It was lucky at the time that he started working there, but there's probably luck crosses our path every day and we don't make the most of it. And that's a big difference.
What this situation gave us was exactly what we wanted when we left corporate, because if we were still in the corporate world, it never would have happened. But because we were a small company, we could make our own decisions. We're like a speedboat, if you like. You could turn quick and do something slightly different. And we just said, do you know what? This is right. Let's go for it. And we made it happen. And the way that we did it is we ended up doing things that other bigger companies had never done before. So we ran a live surgery for foot and ankle in the UK. None of the big boys had done it. We run cadaveric labs in the UK. None of the other big boys had done it. We had our own app for foot and ankle. None of the big boys had done it. No one had done it before, but they all had the money to do it. They all had the teams, but no one had done it. But we knew we had to be different because we didn't have the budgets of everybody else. So we were constantly coming up with ideas to try and say, how can we be that little bit different to make a difference, be heard by these surgeons? So having that autonomy was really, for me, when in that particular time was like, yeah, this is why I left corporate.
And I suppose the autonomy started to outweigh any risk that you were probably feeling as well. Would that be true?
Going back to the beginning of the podcast, and I said the reason I left was loss of power, loss of influence. In a small little company, Mark and me started to almost come up with our own little mission statements or mantras. One of them was whatever it takes. And we had an attitude, and we installed into not just the sales team, customer services, logistics. If you speak to people that worked in the logistics and customer services team of WG Healthcare, they will all tell you that mantra, whatever it takes. And what that meant was that patient that needs that equipment could be your mum, your dad, your brother, your sister, or your friend's family. And so we did whatever it took to make sure in our power that we could get them that implant there, or make sure we could cover the case, or whatever it involved. If we could make a difference, we did whatever it takes. And that was like a simple mantra that we put in that we could do because it was our own little company, and it might only be 20 people, including logistics and customer services and sales, that are all saying whatever it takes. But wow, 20 people with that attitude, you get them together, you see the difference it makes. It really has an impact in a company. And so we'd say one of them was whatever it takes. The other one would be, we're going to be experts. Mark mentioned the word. So we would be experts in minimally invasive foot surgery, or that we'd make a mantra like that. And then, well, what do we need to do to be an expert? We took all our sales team to cadaveric labs and we trained them like surgeons. They became like surgeons. They were experts in their field. And therefore that had a major improvement in how our relationships with the surgeons, they relied on us, they loved us, and they wanted us to be around. That's a small company ethos that we created and makes a huge difference.
I really like that, Ash. What's important is what we're doing, and it's thinking of that end user, I suppose, is that patient. Saying that maybe this gets a little diluted in some of the bigger companies, but in a smaller company, is you can really think about that, to think, I probably know where this implant's going to go. I probably know that person. I've seen it on record. So wanting the best for them, which means we have to get it there on time, or before that, we have to make sure that people have the best training. Then it does bring a different ethos, and it puts you right at the heart of what you're trying to serve, not somewhere in an office that's, 180 miles away, where it's still important and you still value those, but you're not really that involved, and that probably does make a difference. How did your relationship flourish then, Ashleigh and Mark, through this? I mean, you both started off with skill sets that you acknowledged and worked out how you're going to run the company. I mean, did you start to find out that you're developing other skills? Did you start to find out how we could work together more efficiently or better? I'm just wondering how that relationship went on as you started to gain traction and become, a little bit more successful.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think for sure, I think we started to, we knew each other really well, and we worked quite closely for about 8 years at Depew. But this is another level of working together, and it was like, I think our other halves would say that we were like a husband and wife most of the time. We saw more of each other than we saw of them. But we certainly started to understand how each of us worked. And, I sometimes don't like change, and Ash would, well, I've got this idea, and he'd sort of like slowly slide it into the conversation. Sometimes he'd come up with some mad, crazier thing he wants us to do, and I'm thinking, I don't know, that might really, really empty the bank account there. Let's maybe not do that. And I'd be, doing the same sort of thing back to him a couple of days later. So I think we started to understand each other really well. But I think Ash mentioned it earlier on, and that is that the key thing for this relationship. When we first set out, we went to see a bank manager, and the bank manager said to us, right, you want to set up a business, 70% of people in businesses fail. So we're like, right, okay. And he said, most partnerships fail, about 90% fail because they fall out. The two people fall out because of money. And I would say that we had such a level of trust, and we still have, that at that level, it meant that there was we never really had any arguments about that, or any of those things that can upset, and sideline your attention. Our attention was literally always on sales, and the trust aspect was probably as much as important of the success of the company as anything, I'd say.
And that was helped, Gary. I'll add to Mark's comments. This was never about money. If I'm honest, right at the very start of we set up our business, we set up almost like, what do we want the outcome to be? And we both said, better lives, better patient care and customer relationships, and the same salary we're earning now. That's what we said. And in fact, in year one, we never paid ourselves a salary, going back to what Mark said, because we didn't want to go in debt. We paid all our sales team, but we never paid ourselves. And we used to have our business meetings in McDonald's where we'd brought our own sandwiches. And the only reason we were in McDonald's was, one, we might get a coffee, but two, we used their internet. So we'd have the sandwiches that we'd made at home and we'd be meeting in McDonald's, but we didn't pay ourselves a salary for the first year. And then I think that it went to £1,000 a month in year 2. It was never about the money. And so we never had distrust about money. And that never became a thing because we weren't there to make the money. We had different goals and we wanted to achieve different things. And so that's probably the big difference to the 70% that Mark talks about. And that was never part of the equation for us.
I think just adding to that, Ash, I think if the listeners are thinking about leaving a corporation, that purpose aspect of a business is really, really important. If it's just about money, my advice would be don't do it. There's probably better ways and easier ways of making money than setting up your business, much less stressful ways. We were working 7 days a week for probably a year to 18 months, but it was worthwhile. We enjoyed doing it. It wasn't like it was a taxing thing. You were tired at times, but if you've got purpose behind it, I think that really drives it forward. And that's why it probably did work. We didn't say we want to make a business that's going to be bought or we want to sell a business. It was never our initial intention. The purpose part of it is I think, for any potential founders, is a really important part of what they should be looking at.
Question from me, and then I'm going to ask David to maybe ask a couple of questions. So where is WG Medical now then, Ashleigh?
We had WG Healthcare. We were approached we actually set up a business in the middle of WG Healthcare, which was running a hip company, really, hip and shoulder. And we did a separated part of that business that we ended up, we were just agents. We were selling product for a company in Italy. And after 3 years, they decided they wanted to take the agency contract back. So we lost that. At a similar time, we had no intention of selling the business. We never even discussed it. We never prepared the business for sale, as most people would make your business really profitable so that when you sold it, you gained the most. Well, we didn't even think about doing that. And we were approached by one of the large American companies to say, we love this minimally invasive foot surgery that you're doing. We'd like to buy the company. They wanted to buy the products we had, but more importantly, the team we had. And I mean the team. That includes Mark and me, but also our sales team, who at the time in the UK market were experts. And they wanted those experts for all of their foot and ankle range. And so after quite a long discussion, Mark and me decided, and they convinced us they were going to really invest in the company and they were going to take this minimally invasive a long way. And that really appealed to us, that we would be part of it, because they said they'd only buy the company if we stayed 5 years. And at that time, the shock and horror mark on my face, they could see, because it meant 5 years back in corporate that we'd left 5 years ago.
Oh, dear.
Anyway, but after long discussions, they convinced us they were going to spend lots, and we were going to get, we did have an opportunity then to take minimally invasive foot surgery around the world. We went to Brazil, we went to Australia, we went to many cities in America, all of Europe, Germany, etc., big markets. And Mark and myself trained cadaverically lots of surgeons around the world with our surgeon champions, one of which was the French surgeon and another great surgeon called David Redfern from the UK. These two were just brilliant surgeons. And so they went around the world teaching it, and we went with them, and it was just a great time. So we did decide, we sold the company, and then Mark and myself sort of went out of orthopedics for a while, and that was WG Healthcare. And now in July last year, we set up WG Medical. And we're back focused in a very, once again, going back to what Mark said, a very niche product area in hip replacements. And it's early days, and we're trying to enjoy this much more than we did the WG Healthcare business, because one, we have more knowledge, we've done it before. Two, we have an actual different purpose to what we had before, which is more about developing young people from a different market, from a different field, people that are very intelligent, have maybe a 2-1 degree, for example, but have just got stuck somewhere. And we're looking for those people to take on that talent, train them in orthopedics, train them in what we do, train them in the 7 habits, for example, of life, of what we believe in, and in behavioural styles, and lots of different sort of personal gains that they will get from it to make them achieve what they can actually achieve. And so that's what WG Medical was then born around. A different ideology and a different theory, but similar product.
That sounds exciting and different as well. So David, while we've got you on, is there any questions you want to ask the chaps?
Gary, yeah, thanks. It's been a fantastic, fascinating discussion and listening to you both guys. But what really stands out to me is, Ashleigh, your passion and the vision you had, and the recognition that you'd moved too far away from delivering to the key people for the surgeons to be able to achieve what they wanted to do. But the yin and yang, hugely important. That ensured that you were in the 10% of those that succeeded as partners. And the focus very much on why you were doing it, being the delivery of the service and the capability in your vision to be able to spot people and get the right people in who really bought into your ethos that the company has. Don't try and be all things to all people. Know where your strengths are. Gary, I mean, you'll no doubt sum this up as well. Don't overstretch on the finances. And you were able to do that, especially if, having found the right supplier, your German contractor, and working with them, because they're buying into you as much as the vision that you're taking. And for them, that must have been huge, because in effect, as you've demonstrated, you were able to take it not only within the UK market, but also around the world. Absolutely fascinating story.
Yeah, I think it's different. You know, we've tried to bring in different people just to help people think in a different way, question maybe what they're doing and what they really want to do. And I think this is a great example. For me, Ashleigh, is when you started to talk about why you did it. You know, it wasn't about earning more money and going down that route and maybe just feeling, oh, it's great to be a business owner. It's like there has to be a purpose, there has to be an ethos around that business. And I think that you and Mark prove that if you get the right chemistry, the magic chemistry with the 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, wherever that some initiative off, it can work. And what strikes me is the mindset of both of you as well. You've got this mindset of we don't know all the answers, and we know it's not perfect, but we know how to get there, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to carry on that journey, you know, one step at a time. But the one thing that we've got to do is just focus on this area. We cannot let that slip, and that is sales, and that is the customers.
Gary, I'd just like to add a comment on that. So you have to be massively flexible. So both Mark and me came from sales and marketing management roles. Now, I stayed in the sales role because we'd made the decision that that's what I was going to do. And I lived further in the south. The key hospitals were my old hospitals from the past. But you still had to be flexible. So my flexibility would be Mark would call me and I'd have to go to the office and we're unpacking boxes or we're putting kits together, you know, in our work jeans, you know, get out the suit, put the jeans on and T-shirt. And that's what we'd have to do. And then alongside that, Mark's now no longer a sales and marketing manager, not full-time. But the other role he took on was he's now a customer services and logistics manager, which he's never been. He's also managing our CE mark. We managed to get a CE mark, which meant they were our products under our company name. The management files for the office that everyone has to have, the ISO standards that you need to have, 13485, etc. And the amount of times Mark would ring me up saying, "Oh, have you filled in the training manual?" What do you mean the training manual, Gods? I don't need, no, everyone in the sales team's got to have a training manual. And I've up revved, he call it, if he changed one document, our Slavery Act document or something, if he had to change it due to European law, I've up revved the document. So my point in this whole thing is that you have to be really flexible, and it's not something I want to reiterate. I would not want to do it on my own. I wouldn't have set up a business on my own because I understand my own strengths and weaknesses and my behavioural style, and I would not be good on my own. It would not be great. And so you have to find a yin and a yang. You have to find someone that wants to do the hard yards with you and be flexible. So again, to the listeners, if you want to do it, you've got to know all those things. And if it's a business that's big enough and that can accommodate 2 owners, not 3 owners, I'd say 2 owners, then there's a massive advantage to that because you can really help and lean on each other.
I'd like to thank Ashleigh Wells and Mark Goddard for such a very open, honest and frank interview. So thanks, chaps. And also I wish WG Medical every success. So I'll say thank you, Ashleigh, thank you, Mark, and thank you, David.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Thanks,
guys.
Gary.